Spoiler alert, we 21st century humans may not be quite as advanced as we think we are, because eons ago, technology, strangely beyond our understanding today, already existed on our planet. Our ancient civilizations created mysterious, massive structures with the power to transmit energy around the globe and perhaps even across vast expanses of space. Over the centuries, many of these megalithic monuments have disappeared underground, only to be discovered by the most ardent archaeologists and modern-day investigators. The overarching enigma of our ancient builders resides in the mystery of their worldwide colossal stone pyramids, both their purposes and the incomprehensible technology behind their creation. Join us on a journey of discovery of previously hidden truths behind the ancient structures on our planet, their mysterious energy, perplexing power, and their cryptic connection to the cosmos.
On June 13th, 2012, I was in Turkey at Göbekli Tepe. This was a 10,000 BC construction, hugely enigmatic. Who built this strange place? Why? These pillars, 19 feet tall, weighing tons, with animals either carved on them or somehow carved in 3D. And at that point, the German archaeologists had only been able to excavate about 5% of what they knew from deep ground penetrating radar, that the pillars went on and on for 30 acres underground, that the entire place had been buried about 1,000 years ago. When these were actually put in place was 12,000 years ago. That this was a 10,000 BC construction, and it was completely covered up and buried for reasons unknown.
Göbekli Tepe, what we have there, while Dr. Klaus Schmidt, late Klaus Schmidt, he uncovered 4 circles. The Turkish government in the last 3 years uncovered 4 more circles. When I spoke to the late Dr. Schmidt, he told me there are probably 100 circles. So you have 100 megalithic circles, at least, that's been covered by filler material which consists of pebbles, rocks, sand, ground animal bones and ground human bones. The indication that we have ground human bones might tell us something about those who covered this huge site. And how did they treat humans? Interesting thing, there is not a single residential village in the area. So who built them? What was the purpose?
When you look at the sites of Göbekli Tepe and why the people buried it, and it was very clear that they buried the site over and over, this must have taken them forever to bury. So it makes no real sense if it was something that was done quickly. So this was prepared, and if it was done fast, you have to realize that they must have used some technology that is forgotten today, because to move so much material in such a quick manner requires technological advances that we don't have anymore. So if it was done over time, however, how could this be explained? Could it be explained through the fact that they already had some knowledge about the future that they foresaw what could come or what was coming. That's another possibility as well. That site is obviously clearly showing some similarities with other sites or pyramids that were buried in India. They buried many sites the same way, under sand. If you look at the potential pyramids of Alaska, first of all, that pyramid itself, while being underground, could have also been buried under ice and snow. So it's not clear as to know how old this pyramid is in correlation to Göbekli Tepe. In my opinion, that site is more ancient than Göbekli Tepe even.
A man named Doug Muchler, who had worked in counterintelligence in the Army at Fort Richardson in Alaska, calls me up and says, when I was at Fort Richardson in 1994, 40 of us sitting around in a room after dinner, and we had in-house piped-in television. And he really wasn't sure what the source was, but he thought it was one of the stations in Anchorage. And he said, there was a documentary about a Chinese underground nuclear test in May of 1992, and that seismologists had been able to use this underground Chinese test, and that the result was that they had pinpointed a huge pyramid underground about 60 miles west of what was then called Mount McKinley, today is Mount Denali. And that the men in the room in Fort Richardson were fascinated that the scientists in the documentary said that they wanted to do excavations to find out about this big pyramid. And when the program closed, Doug Muchler, who worked in counter intel, was so fascinated. The next morning, he called down at one of the stations in Anchorage and said, I want to get a copy of videotape of what you broadcast last night about this underground pyramid. And whoever he was talking to said, come down, fine. Doug Muchler went down to the station, asked to see the general manager, explained what he and these guys had seen at Fort Richardson, and that he had called for a copy of this documentary. The general manager at the time told Doug Muchler, we didn't broadcast any documentary about any pyramid underground in Alaska. Confused, baffled, in counter intel, and automatically and immediately suspicious, Doug Muchler starts to return to the front door to leave the station. Somebody he assumes is an engineer in the station approaches Doug Muchler and said, I overheard your discussion, and I just want you to know, yes, we did broadcast a documentary last night about a deep underground pyramid. And the man said, you're right, you saw it. There's nothing I can do. And walked away. And so it was fascinating to me that I would get an email following up the report and asking if anybody had seen this documentary. And here is the email from a man who would only allow me to call him John Smith, who identified himself as a 46-year-old adopted son of a retired Western Electric engineer who allegedly, between 1959 and 1961, had worked underground 700 feet on what was called a dark or black pyramid. The son said in his email to me, I was instantly reminded of the stories my father told me. He was a World War II Navy veteran Seabee, and after the war, he earned a degree in electrical engineering and later got another degree in physics. He was recruited by the military to join a group of other experts to study and work in an underground structure in Alaska they called the Dark Pyramid. He's spoken numerous times of how seriously the government took this project and the steps that he took to keep it secret. He said it was a study of energy distribution, and Western Electric, that this father went to work for, was involved with starting the DEW line, a system in Alaska that would be able to detect any intercontinental ballistic missiles coming from the Soviet Union. That's why Alaska was important, that they had discovered this black pyramid with the base 700 or 750 feet underground, coming up to a vertex that was 150 feet below ground. His father spoke numerous times of how seriously the government took this project. If this pyramid allegedly found in 1992 is true, our government may have known about it far earlier than that, according to his father. So when did they discover this? The father was able to say the military had come to Western Electric and recruited him to go on a special project to Alaska. They were loaded up on a bus that had solid blacked out windows except for the driver. They were not to have any information about where they were going. But the father had a compass that he wore around his neck that apparently they didn't see in his jacket. And as they drove on this bus from Unalakleet, the father kept looking at the compass and knew that they were going east, that they had ended up approximately 60 miles west of what was then Mount McKinley, today Mount Denali. When they got to this site, the father said that there were elevator shafts that had been built that went straight down. When he went down in this mining elevator shaft, and estimated it was 700 feet underground, that he, quote, worked in an enclosed room. They would have the rooms down on the corners of the pyramid. He always said they were on the corners and that he worked inside an enclosed building at this vertex. He said that the corners of the structures face northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest, and that it was critical. He began to understand that the government was beginning to have some idea that it was the orientation of that pyramid that was a key to what they were understanding about an energy flow from and through this pyramid. And that a comparison was made for him as a scientist that it was related to Nikola Tesla because of fractals. A fractal is something like a spiral that goes like this. And that spiral is a fractal that is mathematically guided in nature, and that is the spiral of how ferns grow, how leaves on a tree grow. It has to do with a fundamental geometry, kind of a baseline engineering structure in our universe. And that it was the shape of the pyramid that was the perfect structure to create fractals if the fractals are related to somehow enhancing an electric energy flow from these wires at the bases of the pyramid that were not hooked up to any power station.
Through my research all over the world, I've learned that the ancients built the oldest, the biggest, and the most superior pyramids with the perfect orientation to the cardinal points, east, west, north, and south. When I say north, I mean cosmic north, geographical north, not magnetic north, which really moves every year between Canada and Siberia. For example, all Chinese pyramids, 250 of them, are oriented to the north. Cambodia, Koh-Ker Pyramid, north. Gunung Padang, Indonesia, north. Now, 155 Egyptian pyramids, they are all oriented to the north. Why is this orientation so important? We know before and after, and especially from Tesla, everything is energy, everything is vibration. Our planet is huge energy ball. You have energy ball, you have movement of the energy, and two strongest energy flows on our planet, north-south, east-west. You build four-sided pyramid, perfectly oriented, it automatically initiates the movement of the energy within the pyramid.
Especially with the new discoveries of now pyramids we found underwater, like Portugal, like when the Portugal Navy discovered this 60-meter high pyramid that's 8,000 square meter wide, and it all looks so orientated towards the cardinal points. So it's a very clearly defined pyramid that was not speculated over by some amateur archaeologists or anything else. It was the actual Portuguese Navy who discovered it. And again, this pyramid could be probably about 20,000 years old. So the civilization that built it was obviously before the last ice age.
And then off the coast of Japanese island of Yonaguni, they showed not one but 13 underwater cities connected by stone roads. Since they are submerged, they are on the bottom of the Pacific, 30 to 80 meters, so 100 to 250 feet below the level of the Pacific Ocean. Obviously, they were built much before the end of the last ice age.
If you look at even on Google Maps, you can see there are some other pyramids off the coast of Alaska facing towards the cardinal points in the ocean. It's been alleged that there are some lines on the ocean floor that leads towards these kind of pyramid structures. And I think that that's one out of many structures linked to supplying energy to these weird civilizations that may have come from the sky. We have to rewrite all the books about history to highlight those events because we don't know half of our history because it disappeared.
The father said in Alaska they were working underground on some kind of energy distribution or acceleration. He knew they were trying to get energy to go through the corners of this big pyramid and up through the middle of the pyramid and to try to multiply and accelerate the energy. The father did not know what the basis of knowledge of the government was on why they had this plan that if they could somehow unite something in the orientation of the four vertices at the base of the pyramid, that they would be able to generate a strong current going through the middle of the pyramid up through the top vertex. The father said he did not know where this technology in the pyramid came from, and that authorities kept him blindfolded both physically and metaphorically, along with the other scientists that were working on the pyramid. They were not to know what any of the other scientists were doing. He knew that he was working for higher-ups, that the correspondence was from the Pentagon, that he would have mail that would come with a confidential stamp on it, and that those confidential mailings to his father, who worked in this underground pyramid from 1959 to 61, that by the 1980s, his father was still getting the same stamped confidential envelopes from somebody in the government. Now, one of the most interesting things that the son heard from his father was that the pyramid shape was the perfect structure to somehow enhancing an electric energy flow from these wires at the bases of the pyramid that were not hooked up to any power station.
The ancient builders were using pyramids as the most powerful machines that's been working for, according to the radiocarbon dating, for 29,200 years. Pyramid is very complex. We discovered that, number one, the shape of the pyramid is the best amplifier. It simply amplifies the natural sources of energy. Under the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun, we have several forms of energy. We have huge iron plate or iron ore. Iron generates electromagnetic field. The pyramid amplifies this field. Under the pyramid, about 70 feet below, we detected underground water flow. Water moves, it releases negative ions. The pyramid amplifies those negative ions. So we have a huge concentration of negative ions in the pyramids and the pyramid tunnels. During our excavation process, on the pyramid walls and in the pyramid tunnels below, we are discovering a lot of quartz crystal. And quartz crystal has the ability to transform one form of the energy, for example, electromagnetic field, to another form, ultrasound. And we do measure frequency of ultrasound of 28 kilohertz. This is known as the levitation frequency. So now we can see that actually the pyramid amplifies different forms of the energy, making this an energy beam.
But I do believe that the pyramids of Egypt were using exactly the same idea and the same concept to send energy from one location to another. So it was definitely done wirelessly, the same way as Tesla was using it for his towers. So again, either they had access to technology that we don't know about. When you look back at the pyramids of Egypt, gigantic powerhouses, basically centers for generating electricity for the whole area. We've seen some of these hieroglyphs where they were holding those massive lamps inside the chambers, inside the pyramids, but we don't really know how they were able to generate such electricity. We could see a cable running in the back of it, disappearing in the drawings, I guess. But there were many chambers, like in the Valley of the Kings, when they painted the ceilings, the walls of those tunnels going way underground, and there was not a single amount of soot anywhere. So we can imagine from the Valley of the Kings to the pyramids of Egypt that maybe lines and electricity may have been transported wirelessly as well, not just through cables, but like through the Tesla technology. We can see that the current that Tesla was able to harness was from the ground. It's possible that the Mayans and the Egyptians knew about such technology to create this light inside the chambers and the tunnels, to use it on a regular basis.
The world of the past was the world of pyramids. We have proven that pyramids were not built as tombs for kings. However, they were built as the huge energy complexes.
The pyramids are amplifiers built by the ancients to magnify locally, not just inside them, but for miles and miles around them, to change the field in their vicinity. And why would the ancients want to do that? Because if you raise the background hyperdimensional torsion field, you change the biology in the vicinity, you change the medicine, the health of people, their well-being in the vicinity of these objects, these pyramids, these massive static solid-state hyperdimensional amplifiers all over the world. And the amplifiers don't have to be in a pyramidal form. They can be concentric circles like Stonehenge, like Avebury, like the Rollright stones, like all the other ancient sacred sites scattered all over Britain. And then, of course, that led us to the discovery that the crop circles, appearing first in Britain and then ultimately all over the world, were being created by the same kind of hyperdimensional forces, by some kind of technology in the living biology of Earth, as a hands-off prime directive tutorial from somebody upstairs trying to reintroduce us, the honest folks outside, the deep state black ops system, to how to find our way out of the hyperdimensional box that someone has placed us in.
Pyramids have many different purposes, such as the Egyptian pyramids show. They have purposes that relate to interdimensional travel from one planet to another through interdimensional wormholes. So the pyramids relate not only to the planet on which they are located, but they can be used to develop energy to open up interdimensional wormholes for travel between planetary systems. These are advanced civilizations that have the knowledge and the technology to do that. Our civilization has fallen back, and so we have lost all knowledge.
On the top of the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun, we have detected and measured an energy beam, which is electrical in nature. So we know that the scalar waves or torsion fields, they can move quicker than the speed of light, meaning they are ideal medium to transport the energy and information. So the first potential purpose of the pyramids, communication device.
The Alaska Underground Pyramid was technology completely unknown at the time. And how do you enhance the energy flow that they were already measuring in the pyramid? Because they had some knowledge that if they could direct this energy flow right to the center of the base of the pyramid, it would go up and come out the top enhanced. Don't you think that something non-human from somewhere else in the cosmos built this big pyramid deep underground in Alaska?
Megalithic construction is all over the world, on practically every continent. And much of the construction is very similar and sometimes exactly the same. And so there's a similarity between all this megalithic construction and even structures like obelisks and pyramids and huge platforms can be found on our moon. And I maintain that even the NASA missions have discovered what seem to be structures on the moon, and they're covering up these discoveries. But the idea that we have, say, extraterrestrial structures on the moon and probably on Mars too, and that there's a similarity between those structures on the moon and Mars and many of these structures that are found here on Earth.
When I got into the Mars research, one of the really surprising things, in addition to the infamous face on Mars, was my discovery that just a few miles to the west, there were what looked astonishing like a set of pyramids. And these weren't little tinker toy pyramids. They were huge. They were like miles on a side and thousands of feet high. And you could see that they were pyramids because we had stereo imaging from at least 2 different passes by the Viking orbiter over the Sidonia region where the face was, a low sun angle and then a much higher sun angle. So you could not only see that they were taken from different positions in space, but the shadows on the ground were very different. So you could reconstruct the 3D morphology of what you're looking at down there from the shape of the shadows on the ground. And the really amazing thing was that to the west, there was this very geometric, very city-like, very organized geometric array of pyramids. And that instantly bumped up my curiosity because I've always been curious about the pyramids. You know, what were they for? Why do they look so similar everywhere in the world when ostensibly, according to mainstream scholars, people didn't really get to travel between different parts of the world thousands of years ago? We know that that's not true, that there was a great deal of terrestrial travel, but much further back than some of the historians have placed it. So you find pyramids on another planet in an architectural artificial complex. Your first question is, what were they doing building pyramids, and pyramids on such an extraordinary scale? And the ones at Giza, the most familiar pyramids on Earth, they're about 1,000 feet on a side. Well, these are like 5 times bigger, 5,000 feet, a mile. Maybe a mile and a half. The face itself is like a mile and a half long and 1,500 feet high. So everything on Mars was much, much bigger because the Martian gravity is lower. You could build bigger things more easily in a lighter gravity. But still, why pyramids? What was so special that now you have the same shape, the same geometry showing up on 2 totally different planets? Well, it didn't take very long until we discovered that the math and geometry that connected the pyramids in the face were not just any old math and geometry, but in fact they were connected to a physics. Literally physicists 100 years ago with very famous names like Faraday and Maxwell and Tate and others were working on fundamental equations of electromagnetic radiation, and those equations said this whole spectrum is part of one reality, an electromagnetic spectrum, and its ultimate source was not in 3-dimensional reality, but they said in these equations that they're part of a hyperdimensional, beyond 3-dimensional reality. And then they laid out equations that allowed you to work out how from that higher level reality you could get some manifestations of electromagnetic interactions here in 3D. And lo and behold, in the geometric layout of these massive pyramids and the face on Mars, we found exactly the same hyperdimensional geometry connecting in these equations on Earth 3D reality with a hyperdimensional reality. It now was obvious that whoever built this stuff on Mars at Sidonia with a humanoid face in the middle of it, looking up into space, visible from anybody who would send a spacecraft from Earth wandering by millennia or millions of years later, that their overriding message was, this is about you. You know, you and us, we're the same. And number 2, because of the geometry and mathematics, that there was a physics here, the literal physics of reality, the physics that, you know, obtains whatever planet you're on. This physics overrides everything, underpins everything. And if you figure it out, you will have ultimately how to transition from 3D reality to higher level realms. And that gets us instantly into very metaphysical stuff like what happens before we're born and after we die? I mean, do we really live in another dimension? In other words, these are huge existential questions, all coming back to the fact that when we finally got decent images of this little place on the northern hemisphere of Mars called Cydonia, right next to a human-looking face, which screams humanity, there were a whole bunch of pyramids, very much like, only on a much bigger scale than the pyramids we find all over the Earth. And these, of course, are all laid out in my first book on this, The Monuments of Mars, A City on the Edge of Forever.
We can hypothesize that they were interconnected in some way, that they were of the same solar system civilization. And we were hypothesizing that the Alaskan Pyramid was part of the verdant Earth interplanetary solar system civilization that included pyramid-based interplanetary civilizations on Earth, Mars, Tiamat, and Venus. Now, this is all a hypothesis that about 705,000 years ago, either through war or a solar system catastrophe, Tiamat was pulverized and is now the asteroid belt. Mars was brought down to a planet with a thin atmosphere and no vegetation. And Earth, the third of these pyramid-based planetary civilizations, at that time, the pyramids would be used not only for energy on the planet on which they were built, but for the dimensional ecology within which the planet finds itself. So these pyramids are advanced interdimensional machinery for navigating universes.
Most of the technologies out there used to build the pyramids were definitely aliens. At least the notion of using frequencies to move rocks or levitation was certainly one of the main tools for all of these sites. So it was the shared common knowledge without traveling from one place to another, maybe by using spacecraft. They may have taught them how. But even the sites in South America or Central America, they still don't know who built them.
After the cosmic accident, the beings, they ended up on our planet. They could not repair their spaceship. They stayed on our planet, continuing the tradition from their own planet, building the pyramids. So it seems really that our planet has such a strong connection to the cosmic bodies.
Something must have happened that was of significance for them to be always looking up to the sky. I mean, when you look at Nazca, which is, by the way, the second driest place on Earth after the Gobi Desert, and this place has those lines on a 50-kilometer long plateau that depict different types of animals and insects. And all around this plateau, the local mountains have been shaved off, and they have runways built on top of them. And the stones coming from these mountains have been removed and taken out of sight. We don't know where the stones went. In fact, there've been no trace of those stones found locally. So we don't really know where the stones were sent to what purpose. There are also some holes found on those adjacent mountains that were dug for like mining. And most likely those places had gold in them. And so they were mining for gold in different places, which looked like those sites were more ancient than the ones found in Nazca for the Nazca lines. So while those lines are very unusual, like some of them are perfectly straight over like 30 miles. And we could do this today with the new lasers of technologies we have today. But if it was done 3,000 years ago, how were they able to make them so straight? It's hard to understand with rudimentary tools that they had in those days. So they must have used some ET technologies to make it happen. In many ways, like to levitate the stones, to shave off the mountains, they must have had the use of lasers, most likely in a large capacity. So if it was done fast enough, I wouldn't be surprised if they used massive lasers from crafts, but also vaporizing such stones into vapors or even sand. Once again, that can be achieved with frequencies, but it requires like a huge amount of energy to achieve that goal. So I don't believe that the people in those days were able to do it with the tools they had to their disposal.
So they had to have more advanced technology, laser-based technology, the levitation forms of transportation. So for them, I don't think that 1,000 tons or 500 or even a few thousand tons were the problem. They could maneuver with huge quantities of material.
The reason why the secret space program exists is to harness and retrieve all these ancient technologies on the planet that are left behind and learn from them or reverse engineer all of that. I don't believe the US military has the knowledge to duplicate what has been done in Alaska, but the electrical charges that we can benefit from using those equipments, pyramids or not, it's something that's already there. We already have this energy all around us. We just need to know how to harness it. And we already have the technological advances today to do that, but it doesn't cost money. It's basically free energy, and that's the reason why the big companies around the world don't want to use those energies, because they don't make any money out of it. So they will keep it quiet, they will probably destroy them, or they will use it for a different purpose. If it's already like an existing structure underground, the military loves to use it. And I believe that that's the case for Alaska.
I received a very important email from yet another son of a retired U.S. Navy chopper pilot. And one day, a U.S. Air Force chopper landed in Unalakleet, accompanied by an escorting fixed-wing aircraft. The pilot is now telling the father, with the Navy background, that they were not going to do a dew-line station, but they were going to go to an ultra-secret underground facility that was every bit as hush-hush as the Manhattan Project had been. And the pilot told him they were going to have a lot of electromagnetic interference, that it was not a nuclear device, it was not made by humans, it was an incredibly old pyramid, that it was cut from some kind of special black stone, and it was capable of producing enough energy to power the whole North Slope, all of Alaska, and most, if not all, of Canada. The pilot went to VFR since all the instruments started going crazy in the chopper. The chopper's cargo was 3 suitcase-sized containers and made of very high-quality aluminum-looking alloy. There were no markings other than warning labels on these suitcases, top secret, not to be handled or opened unless authorized. The only things visible of the facility was a concrete blockhouse, a small tank farm and motor pool, and the top of what was obvious to the father, that he was looking at what he said was the top of a mine elevator that was surrounded by light towers and electric fence topped by razor wire. One of the questions that I had raised was, how do you think that this pyramid was originally discovered? If it is underground, and when did they start building these vertical shafts, these mining shafts going down? And when did they build these rooms down at the bottom corners of this big 700-foot or 500-foot high pyramid? There was a man who identified himself to me as a Navy captain. He emailed me about what he speculated might be an answer to how our government in the United States found this deep, black, huge pyramid in the first place. Assume you were part of a scientific team tasked with finding the unknown source of an extremely large electromagnetic interference signal. The team would use a variety of highly technical measurement surveys to try and locate the signal. And they would finally determine that the source of the EMI was coming from a single source. And then you would go to that location. There would be nothing there. So what would be the next step? It would be the Department of Defense would tell that military unit, you start digging. We're going to find out where this big electromagnetic interference is coming from. And this makes sense that that's how they would have discovered this large underground pyramid that caused the helicopter to have all this electromagnetic interference. The implication is that that big pyramid was still operational in some way. It was still giving off energy that was causing some kind of interference with the electromagnetic grid that is around our planet, helps keep solar radiation from hurting us. That electromagnetic grid was having some kind of interference from something deep underground that was generating some kind of current that was affecting the magnetic fields.
You have to have an artificial source. Now, what we can see, of course, you have electromagnetism, and during our archaeological digging, we've been finding so much quartz crystal on top of the pyramid, on the sides of the pyramids. Inside the concrete, you can see in the cracks in the concrete blocks, we can find the pieces of quartz crystal. We are finding it in the underground tunnels. So, of course, electromagnetism hitting the quartz crystal, piezoelectrical effect, you have mechanical waves, or in our case, ultrasound. So the ancients were so smart, they were using all these natural elements. They were probably adding some. They placed the pyramids above underground water flows. Water moves, releases negative ions. We have water flows under the ground, not only on one, but on several levels. Meaning, between the water flows, electricity is being generated.
There are basically powerful energy vortexes you can detect through the landscape as well. Like in Sedona, in Arizona, you can see the trees. They are called the corkscrew trees, and they are twisted. And people assume that those trees are being twisted by an underground energy that radiates to the ground, and a lot of New Age people go there and worship the place and go there on retreats, and there's a lot of UFO sightings and UFO enthusiasts, going to these places. But, same thing goes with Giza, with Mount Shasta, with many sites around the world, to be honest.
In Alaska, this pyramid, our government knew, could generate enough power to power the entire nation of Canada. Is it operating today? Is this energy just seeping out into the Northern Hemisphere? Did somebody figure out a way to shut it down? If it is still there, what is the relationship between that big, dark pyramid and maybe 100 underground pyramids that are yet to be discovered?
A few years back, a young guy in Quebec found a hidden city in Mexico that was hidden, I think, on the border of Belize. And this pyramid was part of a constellation with 3 stars. So they were basically looking for stars. In fact, all of the sites around the world were built to do with the stars and the constellations. So in relations to the different constellations out there, like we know, for example, the pyramids of Giza were built according to the Orion constellation. The same thing happened for the Mayan pyramids too. In fact, all of the cultures around the world, like even in the Namibians, pyramids were also built according to the stars. All of them were built for astronomical purposes.
What were pyramids in and of themselves? Why was the pyramid shape important that we'd find it on 2 separate planets? After all those physics experiments and documenting that pyramids are basically hyperdimensional amplifiers of an unseen energy that runs the world, runs biology, runs consciousness, runs everything that we think of as reality. We then found, because of NASA's current rover mission to a crater on Mars called Jezero, another set of astonishing pyramids, except one set which is about the same scale as the pyramids on Earth at Giza, are arrayed in exactly the same geometric configuration, mimicking the belt stars of Orion. But to the west of them, there's a much larger complex of pyramids, meaning instead of several hundred feet across, they're several thousand feet and much higher than any pyramids on Earth. And those pyramids are arrayed in exactly the same Orion belt star configuration, except they're exactly backwards. Now, why would they build 2 sets of massive pyramidal structures depicting Orion. The pyramids on Mars are designed to do exactly the same thing, that is, amplify hyperdimensional energies, but on a much more massive scale than anything we currently have here on Earth.
And not just the pyramids, but also sites such as like Stonehenge, for example. And they've used the stars because they were fascinated with the connections to do with ETs, because that fascination with the stars was probably philosophical as well. They were wondering where they came from, but the science and the powerful knowledge that they had on astronomy was unchallenged and unparalleled. Even today, like in Africa, some tribes believed that they also came from the Pleiades. So they had a direct connection to the stars. And in fact, in some places, they could explain about certain stars within the Pleiades star cluster system that we can't see with the naked eye. And so some of these stars were detected through the new technologies and satellite imagery, but how were they able to detect that in those days? This is a big mystery. We don't know.
If we could go back 1 million years, that there may have been non-humans terraforming and working this planet, knowing how to work between a pyramid structure on top and a pyramid structure below, and that there is a grid, and that once all of that was in place by intelligences who understood the relationship between a pyramidal shape and the orientation on this planet to specific north, south, east, west angles, automatically generated between the magnetic fields of the Earth and the pyramid a flow of energy that could be accelerated and increased, that the pyramid and the pyramid only could provide, that whoever made this pyramid understood.
It's most likely that there were pyramids built on Earth that we haven't discovered yet, that were probably potentially even millions of years old.
However, we are getting into the new era. It's not only the mainstream scientists who work on these sites. They helped us realize that there is something wrong with the theories. They've been working around the planet, proving that number of megalithic and pyramid sites are much older than a few thousand years. They actually prove that much before the end of the last ice age, we did have advanced civilizations all around the planet.
If you look at the pyramids in Alaska, if you look at the structure themselves, I believe that the material used to construct those pyramids are not from this Earth. I think it was brought in, and in order to achieve the energy conduction that they have, this is not something that you can create or make from Earth. It has been brought in. It's a black stone that is superconductive, and it's not from this planet.
The cultural heritage of the world belongs to all of us. They found the proofs of ETs, they found thousands of artifacts. Why would they hide them? This is our history. Let's talk about it. Let's see what we can learn. It has always been about the energy for the ancients. But their concept of energy was much more advanced than ours. Look at what we do. In the last 300 years, coal industry, oil and gas, limited resources, nuclear technology. You go from Chernobyl to Fukushima and back, it's still radiating and poisoning us. Instead, the ancients were using the shapes, pyramids, energy potent places, different form of natural resources, and they were getting energy which is unlimited, clean, and free.
As we're getting to the middle of the 21st century, the planet is suffering from an increasing warming climate. We are still dependent upon fossil fuels in oil and gas. Is it our future to find a way to activate a grid and finally tell the whole world this is how we can live going forward on the Earth, and this is how we can control global warming, and this is how we will end the fossil fuel age? It's so tantalizing to consider the possibility that on our planet that something extremely advanced and extremely ancient, like the Dark Pyramid, would be able to power the entire Earth.
The implications of these basic questions literally our civilization changing? And the only problem is who's currently in charge of civilization doesn't seem to want to change very much of anything. And so it's up to us to figure out how to do it independently, separately, without governmental support, and simply change it ourselves.
The would-be leaders and rulers of this world owe their power to their monopolies over energy, transportation, pharmaceuticals, medicine, etc. They realize that if we understand that there are alternative species out in the universe, then there are alternative energy sources, transportation sources, and it might upset their monopolies.
We are rediscovering history, especially using alternative energies. When you think about technologies that may come from aliens, we probably would have to understand that those technologies will bring us to the next level of consciousness. And I think it's very important to know that it's already happening. We are definitely seeing this change in consciousness, that people are now open to the alien entities. They are open to the alternative energies. They are embracing it without questioning it. We can see that through the use of batteries from Tesla. We can see it through like wind power energy, solar panels. That's just the beginning. Once we understand how the pyramids were built using frequencies, and we know that scientists today have discovered through quantum computers and frequency generating equipment, we can reshape water particles. We can levitate objects through frequencies. We know that. That's already in our hands. We know that's possible. So I think we're just at the frontier of changing the way mankind is going to be living on this planet, and then potentially moving off planet using exactly that technology.
And the sadness is that the cover-ups, the denials, the policies of lies about what our government and other governments probably know versus what is allowed to be shared with scientists and the public. The disconnect is still so huge. Until we can bridge that gap, it's my personal opinion as an investigative reporter for 4 decades, our planet is going to continue to suffer, and the entire population of this Earth is going to be disabled when it's very possible that right under our feet could be the power system that could keep this whole planet going without any contribution to warming.